Welcome to Dive Deep, a ministry of Christ Wesleyan Church where we seek to go deeper and become better disciples of Jesus Christ. I'm your host, Pastor Kyle Roberts, the pastor of spiritual formation here at CWC, and our current series, Anthem, seeks to discover the different seasons we go through in this life and how they were exemplified throughout the book of Psalms. We're excited for you to hear from Pastor Branden once again and his thoughts from his sermon from this past weekend. Pastor Branden, thank you for joining us once again.
You're welcome, Pastor Kyle.
Appreciate having you here. And my fun question for you today is, what character trait are you currently trying to improve?
Yeah, I think it's a tough one. But I think I'm working on my courage. It's interesting how many posts I read where my friends and Facebook friends, which most of those are shallow relationships, but when I see them just come at Christianity, come at my job as a pastor, slam the evangelical church, courage to not post on their post or argue with them, but post something that would maybe be contrary to that. Sometimes I'm just like, all right, I get mad, but I want to handle it in a better way. But I don't want to stay out of those situations, because I believe, along with every negative comment to Christianity, it can lead to better conversations about it. But at the same time, also being courageous enough to say, no, that's wrong. This is actually my experience, or this is this person's experience. Here's how evangelical Christianity has transformed lives and not ruined them, that we hear a lot. So just working on my courage to talk a little bit more about that without feeling like, oh no, am I going to get canceled by this friend? So if I had to say anything, it'd probably be courage.
Okay. Yeah, courage is one of those things that is definitely at the forefront of Christianity right now, especially for those who are Bible-believing churches, because let's be honest, there's not a lot of Bible-believing churches out there. No. So, and one of the things that is always hard to know with social media is, do I get involved or not, like on that post?
Right.
Because oftentimes, where will it lead? I mean, it's so easy to just see the other person as a computer or see the other person behind the screen rather than having a face-to-face conversation with others. And one of the things that I've been thinking about recently is, how do I have those kind of conversations with people?
Yeah.
Especially when somebody may be engaging in sin. And how do you have those difficult conversations? But yet they're so important, because without that truth, there is no change. And without that truth, there is no rending of our hearts back to Christ. That, as it says in Joel, I mean, rending is literally a tearing. It's tearing away from sin so that we can be healed into the likeness of Christ. So I've really been thinking, like, how do we have those kind of conversations?
Right.
And that's just never something that we can really do over social media or text or email, etc. And I think like these really difficult conversations have been relegated to social media in a lot of things, where it's like, here's my opinion, and then I'm just going to go back in my cave where like we're not willing to sit face to face with other people. So that's just something that's been on my mind and my heart, and thinking like, how do we approach these hard subjects with grace, but also together and work through things. So thanks for sharing. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. You're welcome.
So can you give us a quick recap of your sermon, The Apathetic Season?
Yeah, quick recap is, we really tried to define apathy, because I think apathy is really tough to define, because it can mean so many things to different people, but it's basically just, the lack of motivation. The word literally means lack of feeling. And, there's a lot of ways, it's not just in the Christian world that you can become, apathetic, but because my audience was primarily the church, I talked about the dangers of spiritual apathy and, like, for example, the familiarity that we can get with God, that we lose his wonder, we lose awe. And so we kind of just said, like, I expect God to do that because he's done it before, which is good, but then it also can cause you to not do anything about your faith. But then also knowing that there's a cure for it. We need to seek alone time with God. Sometimes our busy schedules can cause us to be apathetic because we just lose that freshness and connection with God.
We lose our focus in a sense.
Yeah, and talked a little bit about exposure too, kind of what we talked about at the onset of the podcast. Just there's so much information out there coming at us about the same thing. And so then it's like, okay, what do I believe? Who do I believe? It's an interesting world we live in, that the church has lived in, that we've kind of had to do a little bit of self-evaluation in the past 15 years with the invention of the internet at our fingertips, because people can go online to find out about God. They don't have to hear it from a preacher where it was before, so
yeah,
how do we find that dynamic? But, that can cause a little bit of apathy as well, because it's like there's so many things coming at you, then like you don't even choose anything. You're like, yeah, whatever. I'm apathetic about God, so why not all roads lead to heaven? That's a form of apathetic philosophy there. Just you're just not willing to explore,
to engage,
like that, engage. But the opposite of apathy is empathy and engagement. And so when Christians lose empathy and we lose engagement, we'll sink into apathy real quick. Mm-hmm. And then we're no use to God.
Mm-hmm. It's like a ship that has lost its rudder at sea. There is no direction to it. It's just
where the waves
aimless.
take you.
Yeah. Yep. And that's the picture that comes to my mind when it comes to apathy.
That's good. I like that
there's
imagery.
Where
were you a week ago when I was playing?
Oh yeah, just that imagery of like you can have your sails unfurled, but if there's no direction, you won't know where you end up. And I think that's a really good way of envisioning the apathetic season is we'll end up wherever we are, whether it's on an island or whether it's on an iceberg, and then not on the water anymore. But speaking of Titanic coming up for our musicals. No. Anyways, so first we have to get into the scripture passage for the day. So you can go ahead and either turn in your scriptures to Psalm 73, which we'll be reading today. You can do that either in your Bible or in your phone. You can also just listen to us because we'll be saying this as we go along as well. Psalm 73. Surely God is good to Israel, to those who are pure in heart. But as for me, my feet had almost slipped. I had nearly lost my foothold. For I envied the arrogant. When I saw the prosperity of the wicked, they had no struggles. Their bodies are healthy and strong. They're free from common human burdens. They're not plagued by human ills. Therefore, pride is their necklace. They clothe themselves with violence. From their callous hearts comes iniquity. Their evil imaginations have no limit. They scoff, speak with malice, with arrogance they threaten oppression. Their mouths lay claim to heaven, and their tongues take possession of the earth. Therefore their people turn to them and drink up waters in abundance. They say, how would God know? Does the Most High know anything? This is what the wicked are like. Always free of care, they go on amassing wealth. Surely in vain I've kept my heart pure, and I've washed my hands in innocence. All day long I've been afflicted, and every morning brings new punishments. If I had spoken out like that, I would have betrayed your children. When I tried to understand all this, it troubled me deeply, till I entered the sanctuary of God. Then I understood their final destiny. Surely you place them on slippery ground. You cast them down to ruin. How suddenly are they destroyed, completely swept away by terrors. They are like a dream when one awakes. When you arise, Lord, you will despise them as fantasies. When my heart was grieved and my spirit embittered, I was senseless and ignorant. I was a brute beast before you. Yet I am always with you. You hold me by my right hand. You guide me with your counsel, and afterward you will take me into glory. Whom have I in heaven but you? And earth has nothing I desire besides you. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. Those who are far from you will perish. You destroy all who are unfaithful to you. But as for me, it is good to be near God. I have made the sovereign Lord my refuge. I will tell of all your deeds.
Isn't it interesting? It's like an emotional roller coaster, these Psalms.
Yeah, it's all over the place.
Just wait. When we get to Psalm 119, are you going to print out all that?
That's a good point. I will need to hone down those verses.
We're not discussing that in this sermon series.
No, not that one. But yeah, that would be a long one to read. But that one's a really good one too.
It's good.
And there's so many.
I
I love this series because of those seasons that are exemplified in Psalms.
Oh yeah, I mean you could choose any psalm and probably throw it into a season of some form. Just the emotion, the rawness of the relationship with God that these writers had. So cool.
And then it seems to me like one of those key moments of a psalm is even in the midst of the emotion, even in the midst of the frustration that a lot of these psalmists are feeling, there's always that pointing back to God.
I will trust.
I will
find
trust.
refuge.
Yep. There's always that kind of switch that flips. And it doesn't necessarily change the life circumstances that they're in. They're pretty much in the same circumstance that they're writing about. But it's that mindset shift that is really exemplified in so many of the Psalms. And I really appreciate that reading through it. So my question for you today is, one of the things you talked about in your sermon was you mentioned how apathy can lead to sin if unchecked. Same as the metaphor of, like, as that ship kind of goes around to sea, you could wreck super easily. So sin in our life would be like that wreck. So how can sin cause spiritual apathy within us? Kind of flipping the question around in a sense.
I think because sin leads you away from God. You know, sin separates us from the presence of God. Therefore, if we're sinning, the presence of God isn't in us. And so, you know, we've just become apathetic towards God and really intentional about our sin. And it's the opposite of what we need to do, you know? So apathy, you're right, can go that way as well. Apathy not causing sin, but sin causing apathy. And I think a lot of times that is the case for a lot of people. I think a lot of people doubt God and get away from their faith because they want to sin.
Mm-hmm.
I want to sin, so why not believe in a universe that doesn't care if I sin? God cares. Is God really real? And so then you sit in that apathy of, he could be, he couldn't be. But if he isn't, then I'm not held accountable to his rules or his guidelines. So then our sin then almost justifies, no, there can't be a God.
And we just continue in that sin spiral.
Yeah, and I don't know if I said this Sunday, but apathy then causes unbelief.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like if you go in that route, sin, apathy, unbelief.
Mm-hmm.
You know, apathy then could cause sin, then could cause unbelief as well. But I don't think a lot of people know they're in the apathetic season.
Okay. Can you tell me more about that?
I think a lot of believers are just okay with being okay. Not really concerned about how much am I giving to God. You know, we're talking about the busy season in a couple weeks. You know, the busy season can cause us to say, okay, I made it to church today. I'm good. Now, throughout the whole week, I'm good to go. Or I read my Bible 5 minutes today. I'm good to go. It's that, I talked about it, that bare minimum faith.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I think it's really hard for believers to identify when you're there. Because I believe in God. I go to church. I put my kids in kids' way. Oh, it's kids. Sorry, kids' way if you're listening. Or kids if you're listening. And then I read my Bible. I'm good to go. They're not serving, they're not
You do the
tithing.
Christian checklist.
There's no right. They see it as a checklist, and there's a lot of people say, "Well, isn't it a checklist?" If you want to have your mindset that way, maybe, but it's really just guidelines. God's bottom line is He wants us to live how He created us to live, and that is a righteous life and life to the full, which means we're in a right relationship with Him. So we need to do certain things in order for that to happen, to have God's blessing. We know we need to do certain things. And so that's just how God works. His love isn't conditional. His love's unconditional. But I think sometimes His blessings are conditional.
Could be. I mean, we see that throughout the nation of Israel.
Right,
when they were following God,
Mm-hmm.
when they were aligned with His will, then they received blessing. When they were not, obviously they were cursed, they were cast out, they were exiled, and we got to see the consequences of their actions by not following God as much as following God. So I wonder how much of that is missed nowadays, where if I do my Bible reading every day, if I go to church every Sunday,
If I tithe every Sunday.
if I tithe every Sunday, then I deserve this blessing. But I wonder, I just wonder.
It's like, what can I do so God can do for me?
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of do it for that, and even that you can slip into a little bit of apathy too.
We treat Jesus more like a vending machine than our Savior.
Yeah, I mean,
in a sense,
it's easy to do in our sin nature, But the thing about the apathy season is it's so important to identify we're there so that we can get out of it. God doesn't want us there. It's that, what are we giving people? We're not hot, we're not cold, we're not offering any benefit to anybody. Being in the middle and being stagnant, being that stagnant water that when people drink it, they get diseased. So it's just an interesting dynamic when you look at it, because I don't think people would really realize that they harm people. But if you're not helping people, what are you doing? I don't know. It's just an interesting thing, this apathy. I told my wife when I went home on Sunday, man, that's tough to preach on. Because apathy is so different in so many ways to different people. And
in many ways, it's not blatant sin. It's not like you're blatantly against Christianity. It's just the epitome of I don't care. So the real question is, how do you make somebody care?
Like, whatever.
Yeah, which is, so, I mean, I can think of quite a few people in my own life who it's like, yeah, I'm a Christian, but I go to church every Sunday. And that's it. That's all I need, right? I don't need to do anything else necessarily. So it's, how do you get people to care more is something that is really important. But one of the hardest things to do as well. How do you create a hunger when somebody is already satiated, in a sense? So, and we live in such a comfortable area. So, it's just interesting to think about.
That's why I think sometimes we go through seasons. I'm talking about a little bit with the transitional season this upcoming Sunday. God wants to root things out of our life, so we literally lack nothing, and so.
We're going to hear some of that in our baptism testimonies too. I mean, so many of these folks have gone
If
through.
you're listening, you'll want to be here Sunday.
Yeah.
10 a.m., be here.
It's going to be awesome.
We're also doing online. It'll be the same sermon, but you won't get the baptism. We're having communion together too.
And they're going to be awesome.
It's going to be good.
So, looking forward to it. Well, I heard that, Cameron, you happen to have some questions over there for us.
I do, and you can also send in some questions while we're off here for the summer. You can just go and visit cwbc.life /dive-deep, and that's where you can submit a question that we can answer while we're off here for the summer from the live event. But here's a question for you here, Branden. What role do you see apathy playing in Christians not regularly serving, giving, being committed to justice, or reaching out to others with the gospel? Is some of the bad reputation of the American evangelical church due to apathy?
Yep. I really think it is. I think, kind of just what we were talking about is Christians aren't out there enough. and maybe we're just not courageous enough to do certain things. Like maybe when we look at certain companies who stand up for sin, do we boycott them? Like is that a form of coming out of our apathy about certain things? Is that, okay, what are we going to do? Well, I'm just not going to buy from that company anymore. I'm going to buy local because I know what this company supports, and it matches up more with my biblical convictions. And so I think that's a form of what we can do as believers, is to stand up a little bit more. But also being courageous too with the questions of what we can do to stop this thought of evangelical Christianity, is when we do see a post, don't just fire back. Because I don't know, I think firing back on social media sometimes is a cop-out and a form of apathy, because we can't DM them and say, hey, let's meet together for coffee sometime.
Let's have a conversation.
I really want to know. Let's have a conversation. Let's meet together face to face, because I care about you, and I don't know about this belief that you have, and so I just want to talk to you about it. You want to meet for coffee? I think that is taking initiative, where it's like, okay, I'm not indifferent about it, but I'm also not going to go on Facebook and just start more fires.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go directly to the source. Let's meet together. I want you to hear me out on a platform where we're actually going to hear emotion, and actually able to talk this through. I think if more Christians would be willing to engage in conversation, not out of defense, but out of compassion and love, I think it would get us a long ways. But that takes a little initiative. That takes some courage. That takes stepping away from maybe the laziness that online brings.
Yeah, I think that is a key factor, the laziness that online brings. And
good things can happen online too.
Yes. Yes, they can.
I'm not saying that online is all bad, but there needs to be another aspect of it where, like somebody I just talked about said, yep, Christians commented on my post and it just verified my thoughts about evangelical Christianity. And it's like, my heart just sank, because I'm like, oh man, I'm the only one willing to have an actual conversation with this person. And so, I don't know, I think sometimes it's lazy to use online as a cop-out and move away from face-to-face questioning.
Because I think it's an easy way for us to hide too. And that's what, personally, I know that I have a bias against social media a lot. So I always have that in mind. Social media is a great tool to be able to communicate with people. Mm-hmm. It's
a good option.
Yeah. It's something that has been great for kind of maintaining a connection with friends from college, from high school, to see what's going on in their lives. And that's kind of cool. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have that connection. But on the other hand, I'm the sponsoring pastor for Best Years Fellowship. And one of the things that always blows me away when I go to a Best Years Fellowship event is everybody is so engaged in having conversations with one another. Best Years Fellowship is so much better at talking than I am. But they can hold conversations, like they know what it's like to check in with people, like on a personal basis. My grandparents do the same thing, where there was so much more of like a community mindset and of intentionally checking in with one another, that I think social media has kind of hurt in a big way, where there isn't that personal connection. It's more of a, hey, I'm posting about my life and then people connect with me. It's like you have to put yourself out there first before somebody were to, in a sense, connect with you. So I think a lot of the depth of relationship that is exemplified in Best Years Fellowship and in that generation is missing because we simply don't know how to do it.
And so the nutshell version of the answer to Cameron's question is yes, it's there for a reason, but it's because I think Christians have lost the best technique of being a witness because of some of the technological advances. That's my short answer.
I like it. It's a good
Just
answer.
switch up technique a little bit.
Mm-hmm. All right, Cameron, what's your second one that you got for us?
All right, yeah, I got one more here. Sometimes apathy can be born out of facing a difficult season that exhausts our emotions or fills our lives with hard experiences. We choose to be apathetic because feeling nothing seems better than opening ourselves up to the potential to feel pain again. What do you say to people facing an apathetic season for that reason, and what is the best way to move forward?
I would say, even though you're in that season, look at the situation differently. There's some times where we cannot help our circumstances, but we can choose how we respond to those circumstances. And so I think it's okay sometimes for a season to be in that mode of protection. I think there's a reason God didn't give us the ability to forget. So when we do experience pain, when we do experience people hurting us, there's a point where we need to say, okay, I need to step back. What just happened? How can I protect myself? And so then maybe we need to refocus then after a time of healing. Like if somebody's been hurt in the church and they stop going to church because of that for 2 years, because they have had that pain of being hurt. I don't expect them, let's say if they came to Christ Wesleyan, I don't expect them to get involved right away. I expect there to be a little bit of healing, but the key in that season is you can't stay there, or you'll never get out of the rut that you're in. There has to be a point where you need to say, okay, this happened. I've had time to process it. I've put the proper boundaries up, and now I need to go somewhere else to find that fulfillment of an unapathetic lifestyle. So find those boundaries, but then move on. Allow healing, but then it's time to move on, especially as a believer, is we need to forgive, not forget, but we need to forgive, and we need to move on from that so that we can further and better our life from that bad experience.
Nobody really goes to a hospital unless they're working there and expects to stay there. In the same sense, when we're experiencing that kind of pain, the church is certainly here to rally around you in the midst of that point, to be your advocate, to be somebody who is really lifting you up when it's hard to lift yourself up. But like you were saying, we can't stay in that position. If you're a patient forever, then
we weren't meant to be in that position.
We weren't meant to be in that position. Yep. One of these moments in my life was when my mom was first diagnosed with cancer and later passed away a year later. I was 15 when she was diagnosed, and I was 16 when she passed away. So the day that I learned she had passed away, I wasn't there with her. I just got a call from my dad and said, your mom went to be with Jesus this morning. And it's like everything within me just shut off. I've been through this season where I instantly went into apathy. It wasn't grief. It wasn't anger. It wasn't frustration. It was nothing. And that day I told myself, I'm just going to live out this day one step at a time and just do what I need to do to get by. And I did that for 3 years, where I just did what I needed to do to get by. And I never really dealt with that significant problem in my life. And that caused me, even in the midst of that season of apathy, there were two choices for me. Either continue to follow what God had for me, what he had called me to do, called me into ministry, or give it up. Say, you know what? I'm done. It's not worth it. I decided that even in the midst of that apathy, even in the midst of not feeling anything within those 3 years, I decided, you know what, God? Similar to how Asaph was here, I am like a brute. Like, I can't feel anything, but I know that you're still with me. So I will trust you in the midst of this season and trust what you have for me, but it still kind of sucks right now. Mm-hmm. So that, like you said earlier, that decision is something that's so important even in the midst of the season of apathy. And that healing is still going on, because even though it's been 8 years, I mean, that's something that still never really has gone away with me. So it's something I'm still working through, but God, I am still trusting you in the midst of that season. And there have been like incredible things that God has done in the midst of what has happened in the midst of that. And the church has been I'm so thankful that I was in a good church body during that time, where we knew that we had people rallying around for my dad, my brother, and I in her loss. And it was them that kept me going in college. It was Pastor Matt, my mentor, as well as Sweets Wesleyan, that kept me going. And now here at Christ Wesleyan, I'm very thankful for the place that I have here because of how good of a church body it is and how people genuinely care. And I think that's something that we can take away from this whole conversation. Are we as Christians genuinely caring for other people? Are we genuinely interested in what is going on in their life? And in the good times and the bad, are we willing to sit with those people and say, regardless of what you're going through, I'm here for you, and God has never left you in the first place. And that's something that I think is so important in the midst of this conversation. Well, thanks for spending some time with us today here at Dive Deep. The heart of why we do this is to bring about transformation for people to look more like Jesus. Be sure to spread the word so more people can benefit from this meeting and this podcast. You can find us at cwc.life/dive-deep, at CWC Dive Deep on Apple Podcasts, and on our YouTube channel at Christ Wesleyan Church. We look forward to providing you with more great content in the weeks ahead, and I pray that this gathering has made you more aware of God's plan and His presence in your life. Have a great week.
It's made me aware of how old I am. You were 16 only 8 years ago. Jeez.
I know, it's kind of weird, isn't it?